Hello, Steve here, and welcome to another episode of The Poetry Pharmacy, where I invite someone I like and admire to bring in a poem that they think we should have on our shelves and be prescribing to everyone. A poem that they carry around in their first aid kit, perhaps. A poem to excite, inspire, revitalize, and nourish body and soul. We'll read their poem, chat about it, and then I'll suggest a poem from the pharmacy that I think might work well with their choice, a sort of complementary elixir. Also, if my guest is a writer, we conclude with them reading a piece of their own work, and that also goes into our pharmacy for future use. So even if the only thing that's ailing you right now is this being human malarkey, as Ira would say, stay with us. This week, I'm very excited to have in the pharmacy the poet and academic Mary-Jean Chan, who is currently on the Forward Prize shortlist with one of her poems. American listeners, the Forward Prize is the biggie in UK poetry circles. I guess it's the equivalent of a Pulitzer, something like that. I'll put a link in the show notes to that poem, which is also brilliant. But first, we're going to start with Mary-Jean reading a poem that she thinks we need to be prescribing more in the pharmacy, and that's Adrienne Rich's Dedications.
Dedications. I know you are reading this poem late, before leaving your office of the one intense yellow lamp spot and the darkening window in the lassitude of a building faded to quiet long after rush hour. I know you are reading this poem standing up in a bookstore far from the ocean, on a grey day of early spring, faint flakes driven across the plain's enormous spaces around you. I know you're reading this poem in a room where too much has happened for you to bear, where the bedclothes lie in stagnant coils on the bed, and the open valise speaks of flight, but you cannot leave yet. I know you are reading this poem as the underground train loses momentum, and before running up the stairs toward a new kind of love your life has never allowed. I know you are reading this poem by the light of the television screen, where soundless images jerk and slide while you wait for the newscasts from the Intifada. I know you are reading this poem in a waiting room of eyes met and unmeeting, of identity with strangers. I know you are reading this poem by fluorescent light in the boredom and fatigue of the young who are counted out, count themselves out at too early an age. I know you are reading this poem through your failing sight, the thick lens enlarging these letters beyond all meaning, yet you read on, because even the alphabet is precious. I know you are reading this poem as you pace beside the stove warming milk, a crying child on your shoulder, a book in your hand, because life is short and you too are thirsty. I know you are reading this poem which is not in your language, guessing at some words while others keep you reading, and I want to know which words they are. I know you are reading this poem listening for something, torn between bitterness and hope, turning back once again to the task you cannot refuse. I know you are reading this poem because there is nothing else left to read, there where you have landed, stripped as you are.
Thank you. So, Mary-Jean, what's it like reading this poem aloud for you?
It means a lot to me, I think, because Atlas of the Difficult World was one of Rich's first collections that I'd read, and I just remember the poem speaking to me completely. I was at a stage in my life where I was abroad in the US, far away from home, struggling with being closeted, realizing things about myself, and I felt like she was speaking to me, that I was the character she was speaking to. I was in a room on my own. I was in that bookstore holding a book. I was, pacing around, and I was thirsty for language. I was thirsty for some kind of recognition, and also this English isn't my first language. I'm from Hong Kong. Chinese is my mother tongue, and just something about the poem's urgency and sort of how personal it was, and yet it spoke to such grand themes of politics, of belonging, of running up the stairs towards a love your life has never allowed. I mean, all of that just, it was as if it was sort of prophetic. And I was like, this is the poem that is going to save my life in a way. So even now I come back to it as like a touchstone, I guess.
Before you came, I was kind of like just looking through and noting all the people who are in a way addressed in the poem, right? The business person. I mean, interesting that she starts with a business person. Okay, business person, the person in the bookshop, someone in the midst of a domestic crisis, or the end of an affair, the beginning of the love affair, the citizen, the ill person, the young disenfranchised person, the elderly person, a mother, a foreign student, and then this vulnerable human being that we all are. I'm interested what you think about that, the knowing. I know you are reading this poem. I mean, she could have written, maybe you're reading this poem, maybe you, the business person.
Right.
What do you think about that, the know, the what does that bring to the poem for you?
I think that's precisely where the intimacy happens, right? It's just that immediately the speaker assumes this sort of knowing, this personal connection that, you would have to understand the speaker, understand whoever you were addressing to say that I know
like
this is true for you. Exactly. But I think that know is also like it's quite like a political public knowing. It's sort of, I know that in this world there is a lack of intimacy. I know that in this world we're all sort of struggling with being neoliberal beings, and we're all struggling to have to conform to certain norms about society. And so this is like a knowing that is generated out of her life experience, And so in that way she doesn't come across as presumptuous. She comes across as someone who understands the world.
Because it may be in the hands of a lesser poet. It could be seen as presumptuous, couldn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
I know this, I know that.
Yeah, like how dare you, you don't know me. Exactly. But somehow that's the tone of the poem. And I think
it's an intimate knowing, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. And I think it's helped by the fact that it's titled Dedications. It's dedicated to these people. So it's not like I know this about you, and I'll sort of tell everyone I know this about you. It's sort of, I'm dedicating each knowing to all of you, because I know you're all suffering and I want to empathize. And I think that was the strongest, sense I got, where I felt like she saw me, or this poet, whatever, she doesn't know me. I've never even heard her read in person. But a Chinese student in America picking up this book felt seen. And I think that was the power of this poem.
I mean, I appreciate you reminding us also that the poem was written in the early 90s, because at the end of the poem, where she goes, I know you were reading this poem because there is nothing else left to read. I thought that was quite interesting, reading it now, where of course we are deluged. I mean, you were in the 90s as well, but we're even more so kind of deluged, inundated with reading matter. And I just thought it's so interesting where she goes, I know you're reading this poem because there is nothing else left to read. And I wondered, well, but there is so much, of course, to read. So it almost also then begs the question, why read poetry?
I think that's exactly what this is sort of suggesting, is that amidst all the information, technology, all the things that we're invited to sort of spend our time on, we spoke about just now, social media, what actually moves you and, remains with you and moves you and just kind of, I guess, changes your life is a small poem often. Still the reason why people read out poetry at weddings, at funerals. I think that's just something so powerful. Like, my friend's getting married next week, and she said, can you read us a poem by someone who you love, and I chose a Pablo Neruda poem, one of his love poems. And it's just something about the distillation of language, about how a lot of these poets are also very knowledgeable people. They are learned people, or they've sort of gone through life with a very attentive eye, with a lot of things have seeped into their being, unconsciously, consciously, and they've now distilled this small, short piece that's on a page. It can fit into, a few Twitter a few tweets, that could be a poem, but then these words are what stick with you. And I think often people say, a lot of things in life can be taken away from you, but poetry, maybe a bit like music or something else, once you've memorized it, you've internalized it, no one can take the words away from you, even if they burn all the books, even if they, and I think that's quite real in a lot of countries with censorship and all of that. But poetry, as you just so powerfully did, you read out my poem and you memorized it, and that's it. You can't take that away from someone. I think for a long time, being abroad, I felt that poetry was something I could carry with me wherever I went, and it's something that was truly mine, and it spoke to me, and it was like a guiding light inside me that nothing could change or take away. So that was, yeah.
Yeah, there's something very deeply soulful.
Yes.
About poetry, and sacramental, which I think again is why we often have it in these ritualized moments of our lives, things like weddings and funerals and things like that, but also those moments where we, just stripped as we are in our existential vulnerability, we kind of slow down and we inhabit, I suppose, our vulnerability and our mortality, and poetry seems to be a perfect companion for that kind of inhabiting.
Definitely. I feel like there's nothing in this world in a way that allows me to embody or sort of express complexity as well as a poem does. I don't know, because I think a poem resists summary, it resists what is this about, tell me in 2 lines, the kind of on the jacket of a book, like this is a story about a mother and her daughter. Like a poem doesn't allow you to do that, it's sort of, and that's why people can write poems about war, about conflict, about the most complicated of things, and yet it's still something that's beautiful, and language allows you to do that you can juxtapose a horrific image with something very tender, and yet it works for that poem. And I think, in this poem, it's very sort of blatantly political. She talks about the Intifada. She talks about, she talks about an immigrant who is reading this poem, that's not her language, but she's still trying to read it. And I think poetry allows for politics to be discussed, but in a way that isn't reductionist, or doesn't try to simplify things. Because truly, these issues can't be simplified, and that's why we're still grappling with all these things today. Think now that she's passed away, and I was born in 1990.
Wow.
This is a poem that I hadn't even existed yet. Really, I was 1 year old. So in a way, maybe that's why I chose it as well. Yeah.
It's a poem that covers
my life,
your
really.
lifespan.
Yeah, and it feels completely relevant still. I'm 27 now.
Yeah. And it's a poem that was written at the beginning of your life, and then, as you said a few minutes ago, it's almost as if it was written to and sent into the future for when you needed it.
Right. I think the best poems do that, really. That you find them at a certain moment in your life and you think, how could they have known, or how could they have written that? But that's what the best poets do. They write these sort of eternally relevant works. Like Mary Oliver is another poet I love, and her poem Wild Geese. It's not even really about anything. It's about love. It's about self-acceptance, but you just can't ever think about a situation where that poem wouldn't apply, or whatever the age. And
I was wondering if you were a Mary Oliver fan, because I feel that your poem, which we're going to come to at the end of the episode, I think has got a number of
Mary-esque.
Mary-esque. Well, you are the two Marys, right?
I am a Mary
Jean
as well,
and it's got a similar flavour, in the sense that there's something like Wild Geese. It hits you in the solar plexus, I think, in a way that your poem does as well. In a way that I think a lot of soulful poems do. Why don't we move to our next soulful poem? I think this poem is also another poem that I would put in that category of deeply soulful, and as with all soulful poems, or a number of soulful poems, it also has moments of a number of moments of humour in it as well, which makes it even more delicious. So this is the poem that I've chosen, to read to you by the Asian American poet Chen Chen. And the poem is called Winter. Winter. Big, smelly bowel movements this blue January morning. From the living room TV, a commercial from our TV company. We're the fastest, the only! Meaning, love us above all others. What makes poop more pungent on certain days? A question for science. From the living room TV, the powerful cite law, bark, order, meaning love us or else. Years ago, a teacher said never to use the word poop in a poem. Today, the icy kiss of the toilet seat wakes me up. Today, I poop while my boyfriend shouts from the living room, "Did you hear that?" Meaning the atomic scientist who says we are now 2.5 minutes to midnight. But still, I marvel whenever poop comes out as one true platonic tube. I am trying to be marvelous and to make my enemies throw up. I mean, if you shower with soap and eat well, maintaining consistent gastrointestinal health, you should be ready for a rim job or other forms of anal play. My boyfriend and I are not platonic. From the TV, a white supremacist cites science, barks, 2 sides to every. I mean, up the throat, out the mouth, the fastest, the only way the powerful let go of their shit. I mean, my boyfriend and I are not into scat, but if you are, I hope your beloved produces the most fragrant citrusy shit. I mean, is shit more or less literary than poop? I mean, one winter night I got sick and pooped the bed. And he just got up with me, helped strip the sheets, carry it all to the washer. I kept saying, "I'm so sorry," shivering, I'm so sorry. But he said, "What? Hey, I love you."
Oh. Beautiful poem.
It is a beautiful poem. And it starts, in fact the Adrienne Rich poem started, it starts with this cracking line. Recently on Twitter, Kaveh Akbar asked people to suggest their favourite first lines.
Yeah.
And this for me has to be one of my all-time favourite first lines.
It grabs your attention immediately.
You're absolutely there, aren't you?
Yes.
And I was thinking about why it grabs your attention, and I think it straddles that important place, that important line between, we could say, sharing and oversharing. Mm-hmm. And it feels like, I don't know, it feels like that's an important line to be straddling in terms of writing poetry. I don't know how you feel about that.
I definitely agree. I mean, I think confessional poets get a lot of sort of bad rap, and you get always compared to, Sharon Olds, or like, she's done it all already, so what else can you do really? But I think there's something about writing poetry that's embodied, that really makes the poem sing and then really makes it relevant to people. I think that initially when I started off writing, I was not able to talk about the body, partly for reasons that this poem speaks to, is that when you are loved, you can poop the bed and know that person will still love you. When you don't trust in that love and you think that your love is shameful, then the body is something that you need to hide or need to stray away from. And I think this kind of writing is something that perhaps I can't even do right now, because I think, the speaker in this poem at least has revealed a deep acceptance of their body, or the vulnerabilities, the way in which it is not perfect. And actually it echoes what Chen Chen's been tweeting about these days, where I saw on Twitter he was saying how, queer bodies these days are almost sort of forced to choose. So either, you're struggling to come out, or you're in this perfect, almost heterosexual relationship where the only difference between you and a heterosexual couple is that you're gay. But you've got the garden, you've got the dog, you've got the children, you're squeaky clean kind of thing. And he was sort of saying, why are queer bodies not allowed to fail? Why are they not allowed to be mediocre, struggling, difficult, just like any other human being? And I think that's sort of how this whole movement towards gay marriage and wanting to be accepted by the mainstream is forced us into, towards perfectionism. And I think this poem resists that completely and says, look, I'm not going to give you a sanitized version of a gay couple. Instead, I'm going to talk about the dirty things and the difficult moments, which is why I think.
But also, what I love is he makes the so-called dirty things, dirty in all the meanings of that word. Yeah. He also shows through humor, through craft, just the beauty of that. I mean, the line, but still I marvel whenever poop comes out as one true platonic tube. This is... I mean, let's face it, yes, there is an aesthetic element to excrement, right?
Yes,
and he has shown that to us.
He's embodied that. It's amazing.
In this beautiful line.
Yeah.
One true platonic tube. Oh, yes, Chen Chen.
Yes, exactly. No. And then he follows it with, I am trying to be marvelous, which I think is spot on.
But then he follows that with, and make my enemies throw up. And I was interested, who do you think are the enemies of this poem? Are they enemies of language, enemies of sexuality, enemies of imagination, all of the above?
Yeah.
Who are those enemies that he's trying? He's kind of gently, or not so gently, kind of having a little poke at.
I think that's an interesting question. I mean, I think he's sort of named quite a few of those. He's named in a way law, order. He's talked about, a white supremacist, and he's talked about science even potentially, because, maybe that's an enemy to other things that defy its so-called logic, or, what's allowed, what's natural, what's not natural. I mean, homosexuality has always been talked about as being unnatural, although that's not quite true. Yes, I think that this sort of him being his marvelous queer self, followed by the line, to make my enemies throw up, I think is quite a brilliant move, really. That it's all the enemies he's naming, really. He's not mincing words.
And maybe going back to what you were saying, perhaps he's also talking about people who are in some way, perhaps even unconsciously, as we maybe all are to some extent unconsciously, enemies of the body, of our own bodies, of other people's bodies, because he follows up the line about making the enemies throw up by kind of a provocation, right?
Yes.
He's like, okay, I'm going to talk about not just poop, but I'm going to be talking about, rim jobs and anal play. Do you have a problem with that?
Right, yeah, definitely.
Is that going to make your stomach turn in some way?
And I think he knows that does make a lot of people squeamish, or even like, oh, can't, that's for the bedroom, or that's for, and I think language in a way strips away those sort of scaffoldings, or those, you can't be squeaky clean. I think language, sometimes the best poets don't allow you to do that, to say, oh, I'm gonna be this person, but then not let you see any of it, or I'm gonna keep that shameful self, or something that I might be unable to deal with. I'll hide that behind a wall, or in the closet, really. I think this poem is literally pushing you to the edge of, like, admit it, admit all the things you love, that you do with your life, that you are, and in a way then invites us at the end to come out into the world of love and say, if we're lucky in life and we allow ourselves to be loved, there will be a day when someone can hold all of that and say, I love you. I still love you, despite all of that,
Can literally sort of take, as it were, our shit.
Yeah. Actually take it and say, look, I'm going to help you. And
say, I can deal with that.
I can deal with that, exactly.
That is really what you could say. That's, if you're looking for a definition of love, that's it, right?
And I think in that move at the end, that turn, which maybe I wasn't expecting really, it reminds me of the Adrienne Rich poem. It suddenly turns from the sort of exquisitely intimate to suddenly the universal, that all of us really, whatever our gender, sexuality, race, all of that, we ultimately we want that moment where we've shit the bed and the lover says to us, hey, I love you, you know, and he ends there. And that's a, you know, sort of quite a loud poem in a way, like quite noisy. There's a lot going on, the TV blaring, and then suddenly we're brought to this quiet moment of like acceptance. And we don't know what the speaker then says to that, but then we're invited to almost accept that that's, you know, that's a possibility in this world. I just saw part 1 of Angels in America the other day. I was watching it in the picture house, and this poem somehow now really echoes that, because I don't know if you've seen it, but it's, you know, Tony Kushner's play, and just obviously talks about love. You know, what is love when your lover is facing essentially a death sentence? What do you do with that? And obviously explore the vulnerabilities of all the characters who can or cannot hold their lover's shit, essentially. And I think, I mean, that play dramatizes all those fallibilities that we have, I guess, those flaws that make us human, and it doesn't try to make these queer characters perfect. And I think that's why it spoke to me. So let's maybe springboard or gently hop into your poem, because I think, again, it talks to so many of the things that we've been chatting about. So this is your poem, Mary Jean Chan, Self-Portrait. Could you read it for us, please? Yes, of course. Self-Portrait. So it begins with a quote from Octavio Paz. Tree that is firmly rooted and that dances, turning course of a river that goes curving, advances and retreats, goes roundabout, arriving forever. 1. Tell me what I am, for I cannot fathom at a glance why this creature longs for sunsets it has not yet seen, or refuses the notion of home, only to set out in search of it. 2. I wear skin the way the land bears its own light. I cry rain, speak thunder, burn at the core of this being human. I am Tellurian, tethered forever to this sublunary sphere. Is that why I am unable to forget you, you whose words stain the skies at dusk, a flock of swallows mapping their sorrows with each wing beat? 3. O canvas earth, we were never born artists enough for you. You speak to us in prophecies now. Your veins are molten lava, torrential rain, hurricanes, glaciers drowning in the currents of our undoing. What do we landlocked souls know about the ocean? We have a world of ice frozen within us, and the waters are rising. Thank you. I was supposed to be revising for my exams. I was at the time an MPhil student at Oxford, and I was doing international development. So it was partly maybe because the reason why there's quite a lot of natural imagery here is because I was studying for my environmental politics exam. I was doing environmental movements in China. That was the syllabus, and I think I was thinking a lot about the land, you know, all of that. But that was a moment in my life where I knew I probably was not going to go down that path. I was actually thinking of switching out to do poetry again. My bachelor's was in politics and literature, and I'd gone down the politics route for a bit as a postgrad student, but then kind of realized increasingly that poetry was where I really felt like I belonged. And so that poem came in a rush. I was supposed to be revising, wasn't doing that, and I was doodling, I was writing, and then the first line I wrote actually of this poem was, I wear skin the way the land bears its own light. That was the first line that came to me, and I sort of was like, that sounds good. But then was also feeling a lot of things. That was at the time where I was about to leave Oxford. I had sort of come out, but not quite yet. Was really still grappling with wanting to leave home, but wanting to go home, you know. I was at an in-between stage. I knew that I had to, I guess, figure myself out. And so the name Self-Portrait came quite quickly after that. This is sort of me trying to grapple with who I am, but maybe also influenced by, I guess, Mary Oliver, the poets. I was actually reading her book at the time. So that probably seeped in as well, just how her poems are so intimately connected to all living creatures, essentially. The way she talks about the flowers, just I mean, normally in the hands of a lesser poet, it would really come across as very cliche, very sort of, why on earth are you talking about flowers again? Because that's just so, daffodils or that kind of thing. But she did inspire me to maybe use those words like rain and thunder and all that. I was like, oh gosh, like there's a risk in this poem of it really sounding quite bad, like you cry rain, like whatever. But then I thought, no, actually, I'm gonna keep going. And I think the thing with this this kind of poetry is you have to go all the way, or you don't even attempt it. I was like, okay, I'm gonna bring in torrential rain, hurricanes, glaciers, like all of that. But I also wanted this to speak to humanity at the moment, which, at the time I was studying about environmental politics and how we were destroying the earth in so many ways. And I suppose there was that intermingling of the way the earth was suffering. I felt like I was suffering internally because I had all these secrets or lies. Adrienne Rich has this compilation of silence, secrets, and lies. And I just was reading that at the time, and I felt, we have a world of ice inside us. We are all so cold and we're unable to open up. But yet at the same time, there's climate change and the waters are rising. And I think, these images were all maybe like pressed up against each other inside of me. And so the poem actually didn't happen in one go. I wrote like hence the three sections. They kind of all happened at different times, but within, the same month, I think. And then I sort of pieced them together. So one of those poems that, came in a rush, but then had to be reworked. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear what you were reading also in terms of kind of non-poetic material at the time, because I mean, you've got some quite very sort of specific vocabulary in here, the perhaps actually we should have signaled that before the reading, the meaning of words like tellurian. I think that's probably the one word that most people would have to look up. I know I needed to look that up. Tellurian meaning really just of earth, right?
A
word like tellurian, was that something that you already had that word because of the reading, or was that something where once you had kind of written the sort of the bare bones of the poem, you thought, right, I need to go and do a little bit more reading around this and kind of educate myself a bit more in terms of these domains? I
think that's a very good word. I think tellurian was probably something I'd read as in an SAT word or something like that. Or a kind of, I picked it up somewhere. I never used it. And then because I wanted something to sound good with tethered, the alliterative
So
noise,
you had the word tellurian.
I sort of had it in the back of my mind, not really. Obviously would never have used it.
I think you must be one of the few people on the planet.
Well,
maybe it's this difference in culture that, because it comes from an SAT, which is an American thing,
and
right?
it was like an ESL learner trying to learn English words, so obviously I think we try quite hard because we're we need to acquire vocabulary. And same thing with sublunary, actually. I didn't actually know sublunary, but I wanted something to sound like another S, like sublunary sphere. I had the word sphere, so I then went and thought, what is a synonym for moon? For the moon?
I mean, they work together so beautifully. It's such a fantastic poem to learn.
SAT words.
to learn SAT words, but also to learn by heart. I would really recommend anyone who wants to learn a poem by heart to learn this poem, because there's something so pleasurable about I cry rain, speak thunder, burn. I love that burn at the core of this being human. I am tellurian, tethered forever to the sublunary sphere. I mean, it's just gorgeous, the vowel sounds there.
Thank you.
Yeah, they just kind of blows me away.
Another poet I was reading at the time in translation was Rainer Maria Rilke, and I was reading his Duino Elegies, and obviously that's very, almost spiritual, and he was almost called to write these poems. I think he said somewhere that he'd basically heard a voice and then started transcribing the elegies, and that it all came to him in a rush. I think I maybe was inhabiting that voice. These poets that I was reading at the time all had that to them, that their work, Mary Oliver, Rainer Maria Rilke, they were all trying to connect the body to something bigger. And somehow that really comforted me. And I think that's probably how a lot of people feel, that's this need to connect to the wider universe, or this sense of belonging, you know. And I think I was maybe subconsciously meditating on that anyway. And so I think it did happen, you know, to think I wear skin the way the land bears its own light. Like now I'm looking back, I'm like, that's quite like a bold statement, or like a, you know, big statement in a way. Like I don't actually write lines like these anymore, funnily enough.
It's also quite a cryptic statement in the sense that even though I've spent weeks with this poem, I still don't necessarily know what that means. I have a whole bunch of kind of, you know, every time I come back to the line, it brings up different things for me, which again is the joy of learning a poem, that you keep on coming, you know, back again and again and again and again and again to the same line, and each time you come back, you catch a reflection that wasn't there before.
I think it's interesting because some poets that I read, at least, sometimes you read the line and you think the language is almost bigger than the poet, or maybe means more than the poet ever meant it to mean. And I think for me, you know, I still think the language preceded the understanding, or the kind of literal comprehension. That now I'm rereading it, I'm like, yeah, what exactly did I mean at the time, you know? But it still sort of works in a linguistic, grammatical, and also metaphorical way. And I think this poem was, you know, an early attempt of that, like reaching out towards meaning, or sort of a sense of, I don't know, poetic prophecy, maybe even, that was maybe bigger than my own capabilities at the time. But that's why I think it's interesting you picked this, and now that I come back to it after, 4 years now, it still feels a poem that's dear to me, because I felt like at the time I was really embodying that reaching for poetry, reaching towards what it could do. And because I was shoring up myself really literally every day by reading these poets, you know, that they were my lifeline at the time. I had a lot of sort of, you know, I guess confusions and anxieties, and sort of, you know, the way you deal with how do you embody your own true self whilst being loyal to all these other people and things. How do you risk everything in a way to change? Yet all these poets were calling me to do just that. You know, Rainer Maria Rilke says, change your life, in his poem. And
as does Mary Oliver.
As does Mary Oliver. She says, save yourself, you know, in the journey. And then, funnily enough, I think Adrienne Rich then actually writes about Rilke as well, because she read Rilke when she was younger. And somehow they were all in conversation with each other. And this poem was maybe me being like, I want that as well. And yes, again, as I say, I actually don't write like this anymore, or maybe haven't attempted to. So it's quite an interesting poem to
well, I'm so pleased that you did once write like this and write this poem, because this poem has become for me now something that is deeply soothing and interesting, but also unsettling. It's not just a poem that soothes, although there is something about the music that is very soothing. It is also unsettling, and so I'm so grateful that I now have this poem flapping around inside me, like this flock of, like the flock of swallows mapping their sorrows with each wing beat.
Thank you.
When I was learning it, I would often mistake the wing beat and say heartbeat.
I like that.
But I think that was also my unconscious kind of going, well, that is there is something there in the wing beat and the heartbeat.
Definitely. I like that. Yeah. And maybe it was like looking back, I was also now, obviously, I was at the time reading Octavio Paz, who uses, you know, natural imagery really brilliantly, like very vividly, fire and water, and all these elements are in his work. So yeah, perhaps I was just really just quickly internalizing all these different voices that had really sort of amazing, I guess, grasp of nature and human nature as well. And they intermingled the two to create, you know, great works of art.
And to create you.
And to create me, yes. I am a product of these poets. I do feel that, the soul is crafted by what you feed it, right? And I fed it a lot of poetry.
You fed it some good stuff
I
there.
fed it some good poetry, I guess.
So well done for
you.
feeding and for creating this. And thank you so much for coming and reading to me today.
It's a pleasure.
I've really
Thank you so
enjoyed
much.
it.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. If so, please could you do us a short but hopefully sweet review on iTunes. That would really help to publicize the podcast further. Don't forget, we are on Twitter also as @PoetryPharmacy, and if you're wanting a prescription, we're more than happy to provide you with one. Just DM us or tweet whatever's ailing you, big or small, and we will find you a poem. You can also email thepoetrypharmacy, all one word, @gmail.com. One final thing before we go. In the next year, I'm going to be involved in a fundraising project called 52 Poems in 52 Weeks, where I'm trying, as the name suggests, to learn 52 restorative, soul-nourishing poems like the ones you've heard today in 52 weeks in order to raise some money for the Safe House Education College Fund in Kenya. This is a charity that was set up about 15 years ago to help young Maasai girls escape from FGM and childhood marriage, as well as provide them with primary and secondary education. Last week I learned the poem we talked about today, Self-Portrait, and if you want to see me doing my cover version recital of that poem, you can watch that on the YouTube channel, which is called 52 Poems in 52 Weeks. It would be great if you could subscribe if that sounds interesting, but even more so, a large or small donation, even a couple of bucks to the sponsorship page link on the website would be so very much appreciated. In the next few weeks, I'm also going to be posting up on the fundraising page some prizes, some poetry collections, which anyone who donates $5 or more will be in the running for winning, so keep an eye out for those. Thank you for listening, and take care until we meet next time in the Poetry Pharmacy.